What would you do if the one dream you wanted more than anything in this world, the one thing no amount of money, no amount of power, no amount of love could give you, was something another woman could offer your husband simply by existing? What would you do if the only way to give the man you loved the family he deserved was to step aside? Not out of weakness, not out of defeat, but out of a love so vast, so ungovernable, that it could hold even that. This is the story of Seol Ji-yeon, a woman married to the most feared man in Seoul, a woman who had survived everything: betrayal, violence, grief, the grinding loneliness of a life lived at the top. But the one thing she could not survive, could not fight, could not outmaneuver with intelligence or grace or money, was her own body. And what she chose to do about it will stay with you long after this story ends. Stay until the very last word, because the moment that will completely break you open, it is not the one you are expecting, I promise you. There is a building in Hanam-dong, Seoul, that stands 42 floors above the Han River and casts its shadow over some of the most expensive real estate in the country. Its residents do not discuss their business in elevators. Its security staff do not ask questions they are not paid to ask. Its penthouse has been home for 15 years to a woman named Seol Ji-yeon, and she has made it, in that time, into something that is less a home and more a masterwork, a controlled environment, a place where nothing enters without her knowledge and nothing happens without her consent. Ji-yeon is 43. She is the kind of beautiful that does not ask for your attention, but receives it anyway, the kind built from stillness, from the particular posture of a woman who has never once needed a room to validate her presence. She dresses simply and expensively. She speaks little in public. In private, her mind moves with the speed and precision of someone who has spent decades operating in two simultaneous worlds: the legitimate world of Seoul's philanthropic and business elite, and the invisible world of the Kang Syndicate, which her husband has led for 20 years, and which she has helped sustain through every crisis with a quiet competence that most of his lieutenants will never fully understand or acknowledge. Her husband is Kang Min-jun. To the outside world, he is a property developer. He has a company, an office, a registered address, a tax history, and a reputation for completing projects on time and under budget. He is donated to hospitals, to arts foundations, to a children's literacy initiative in Gyeonggi Province. He is, by every visible metric, a successful and civic-minded businessman. To the invisible world, he is the head of an organization so old it predates the Korean War, so embedded in the country's commercial infrastructure that removing it would cause damage visible for a generation. He is not a man who raises his voice. He is not a man who makes threats. He is a man who states things once, quietly, and those things then occur, because the alternative is something no one who has been in the room with Kang Min-jun is willing to contemplate. Ji-yeon chose him. She wants this understood clearly by anyone paying attention. She was not swept up. She was not naive. She was 28 years old, the daughter of a dissolved rival organization, a woman who had grown up understanding power the way most people understand weather: omnipresent, inevitable, something to navigate with intelligence and respect. She looked at Min-jun and she understood him completely, and she chose him anyway, because beneath the architecture of control, beneath the silence and the precision and the cold efficiency of a man who had learned to survive by never showing his underside, she saw something else. She saw that he was, in the marrow of him, a man who wanted to build something, not just accumulate, not just protect, build a family, a legacy, a life that amounted to more than the sum of its transactions. She wanted the same thing. This is the detail that matters. This is the thing you must hold through everything that follows. Both of them, from the very beginning, wanted a child, not as an heir in the dynastic sense, though that narrative was available to them and others would have used it, but in the simplest, most human sense, a child to love, a life to tend, a reason to build something that outlasted the business. They tried for 3 years before the first diagnosis, then another 18 months before the second opinion confirmed it. Then came the treatments, the clinical, sterile, hope and devastation machinery of fertility medicine, which Jian entered with her characteristic precision and exited 5 years later with nothing but an intimate knowledge of every way the body can say no. She was 43 when the doctors told her finally, with the careful faces of people delivering news they have been trained to deliver, that there were no further options they could recommend, that her body had given its answer, that the answer was permanent. She thanked them. She gathered her things. She rode home in the black car with the city moving past the tinted windows, and she did not cry, not then. She saved that for later. Alone in the bathroom of the penthouse, the shower running, the city glittering below, while she pressed her back against the cold tile and allowed herself exactly 1 hour to grieve a life that would not happen. Then she stopped. She stood up, she turned off the shower, she dried her face, and walked back into her marriage, and did not speak of it again, not to Min Jun, not to anyone. Because the grief was hers, and she did not yet know what to do with it, and Jian had learned early and permanently that you do not put down something you are carrying until you know exactly where it is going to land. Amara Delani arrived in Seoul on a Tuesday in March, carrying 1 suitcase, a document folder organized with a neatness that spoke of someone accustomed to making order out of limited resources, and the particular composure of a person who has traveled very far from everything familiar and has decided that the distance will not show on her face. She was 26 years old. She had grown up in Matanda in the Eastern Cape of South Africa, a city that sits in the fold of the hills near the mouth of the Mtata River, where the landscape is vast and deeply green, and the community is tight in the way that communities become when survival is a collective project rather than an individual one. Her mother, Namvula, was a nurse. Her father had died when Amara was 11, and Namvula had raised 4 children on a nurse's salary and a stubbornness that Amara had inherited so completely she sometimes felt it in her spine. She had studied hospitality management. She had worked in Cape Town, then briefly in Dubai, then accepted a placement with an agency that placed domestic professionals in high-net-worth households across Asia. She had accepted the Seoul assignment because it paid 3 times what she had earned in Dubai, because she needed to send money home to cover her youngest brother Lathiwi's university fees, and because she had, in her 26 years, developed a talent for walking into unfamiliar rooms and making herself indispensable. She did not know whose house she was entering. The agency's briefing had been thorough on expectations and compensation and thin on context, which itself was a kind of information. She understood from the security protocols of the building alone that this was not an ordinary household. She filed this understanding carefully and said nothing about it. Her interview with Jian lasted 40 minutes. Jian asked her about her family, about her training, about how she handled conflict between staff members, about what she did when she disagreed with an employer's instruction, about what she considered the difference between discretion and dishonesty. Amara answered everything directly, without performance, without the rehearsed quality of someone who has memorized what employers want to hear. When Jian asked the difference between discretion and dishonesty, Amara thought for a moment and then said, "Discretion is choosing not to speak. Dishonesty is speaking falsely. They are not the same. I can be completely discreet and still be fully honest. I will not tell your business to anyone outside this house, But I will not lie to your face about what I see or what I think if you ask me directly. I can only offer you one or the other. I cannot offer you both." Jian looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "You start Monday." Amara settled into the household with the ease of someone who had done this before, who understood the architecture of a wealthy home, not as an outsider looking in, but as someone trained to read it, to find its rhythms, to move within it without disruption. She learned the preferences of the household quickly. She learned that Jian took her coffee with no sugar and a single piece of dark chocolate on the saucer, not because she asked for it, but because she always paused when she passed the kitchen cabinet where it was kept. She learned that Min Jun's tension lived in his jaw, and on the days when the jaw was tight, no one should approach him before he had been given 30 minutes and a cup of barley tea. She learned the weight of quiet in this household, how much information it carried, how much it was expected to hold. She was good at her work. She was, in fact, exceptional at it, and she had been in the household for 4 months before she began to understand the particular grief that lived in it. She noticed it in small things, the way the room that had been decorated as a nursery, soft gray walls, a window seat, shelves that had never held anything, was always kept clean but never entered by either of them. The way Jian sometimes stood in the hallway outside it, with her hand not quite touching the door for just a moment before walking past. The way Min Jun, who was not a physically demonstrative man, would sometimes reach for his wife's hand at the dinner table for no apparent reason. Not a romantic gesture, but something older, something that looked like, "I know, I am still here. I have not forgotten what we lost." Amara noticed all of this and said nothing. It was not her grief to name, but she carried it with her, the knowledge of it, the way you carry something you have been trusted with without being explicitly asked. If this story is already reaching somewhere inside you, you are not alone. Drop a comment right now and tell us what is the hardest thing you have ever chosen to do out of love. And subscribe if you have not yet, because where Jia lows from here is something you absolutely need to see. It began the way most true things begin, not with a dramatic moment, but with an accumulation of small ones. Jian noticed around the 6th month of Amara's time in the household that Min Jun had begun to linger. This was not his habit. Min Jun moved through his home the way he moved through the world, purposefully, directly, without pause. He did not stand in kitchens making conversation. He did not sit in common rooms when he could be in his study. He was not unkind, but he was economical with his social presence in the way that very powerful, very busy men often are. He gave you what was required and no more. And this was not cruelty, but simply the conservation of a man running on a very finite reserve of energy. But she noticed him one evening, standing at the kitchen counter while Amara was preparing his barley tea, and they were talking, not in the transactional shorthand of employer and staff, but in the longer, more exploratory mode of two people who have discovered that the other one is interesting. Amara was telling him something. She was animated, her hands moving slightly, describing some landscape she had known in childhood, the color of the hills above Mathata at a certain hour. And Min Jun was listening with the full, unhurried attention he normally reserved for information that could affect the syndicate's survival. Jian stood in the doorway for a moment. Neither of them saw her. She went to her study and sat down and looked at the wall for a long time. She was not a woman who catastrophized. She was not a woman who leaped to conclusions or constructed narratives out of single moments. She was a woman who gathered data, assessed it without sentimentality, and then made decisions. So she watched. Over the following weeks, she watched with the same precision she brought to anything that mattered. What she saw was this. Her husband was not conducting an affair. She was almost certain of this, and her instincts in such matters had never failed her. What he was doing was something in some ways more complicated and in some ways more innocent. He was drawn to Amara in the way that people are sometimes drawn to a quality in another person that they did not know they were hungry for. Amara had a specific kind of warmth. Not performed warmth, not the professional warmth of excellent service, but the real thing. The warmth of someone raised in a community where people were genuinely each other's business, where caring for others was not a personality trait, but a baseline assumption of human interaction. She asked Minjun how he was, and she meant it. She remembered things he mentioned in passing and followed up on them weeks later. She was, in some fundamental way, present with people in a manner that life at the top of a criminal organization did not generally accommodate. And Minjun, her brilliant, contained, iron-willed husband, was responding to it like a man who had been in a drought for so long he had forgotten what water tasted like. Jian watched all of this, and alongside it, she watched something else. She watched the way Amara looked at him when he was not looking, not with the hungry, complicated look of someone conducting a secret campaign, with the look of someone who was aware of a feeling, has taken careful stock of it, and has decided it must be managed rather than indulged. The look of a woman with enough integrity to carry something difficult without acting on it, and enough self-knowledge to know that it is there. Jian respected that look enormously, and it was in the watching of it, in the noticing of Amara's quiet discipline, her decency, her refusal to become something she had not been invited to become, that Jian began, for the first time, to think the thought she had been circling for months without letting herself land on it. She began to think, what if? Not the panicked what if of a jealous woman, the deliberate, considered what if of someone who has spent her whole life refusing to let fear make her decisions for her. What if this is not something to be prevented? What if this is something to be considered? And beneath that, the thing that lived beneath everything, the grief that had never finished, the question she had never spoken aloud. What if this woman could give him what I cannot? She sat with that question for a long time, weeks, alone with it in the early mornings, in the garden, pruning the orchids she tended the way she tended everything, precisely, patiently, with the understanding that growth cannot be rushed, only conditions created. And slowly, the way the river finds its way around the stone, not by force but by persistence, she arrived at something. Not a decision yet, an opening, a willingness to think about what she had always assumed was unthinkable. She asked Amara to walk with her in the rooftop garden on a Sunday morning when the household was at its quietest. Minjun at his office, the security rotation freshly changed, the city below still slow with the particular languor of early weekend. The garden was Jian's domain in the way that the penthouse as a whole was their shared domain. Hers, specifically, tended by her hands, arranged according to her vision. Orchids, mostly, some bamboo, a persimmon tree in a very large pot that had taken 3 men to carry to the roof and that produced, every autumn, a small number of persimmons that Jian preserved in a way her grandmother had taught her. They walked. Jian spoke about the plants for a few minutes. Amara responded, asked questions, listened. This was a quality Jian had noted from the beginning. Amara listened the way very few people did, fully, without preparing her next sentence while you were still finishing yours. Then Jian stopped walking. She turned to face Amara directly, and she said, without preamble, without softening, I cannot have children. This has been known to us for 5 years. My husband has never spoken of it outside our home. He has never complained. He has never made me feel as though it changes what I am to him. But I know him, and I know what it has cost him to set aside a dream he has carried since he was young. And I know that he will continue to set it aside, without complaint, for the rest of his life, because that is the kind of man he is. The garden was very quiet. Amara said nothing. She was watching Ji-yeon with large, careful eyes. I am not accusing you of anything, Ji-yeon said. I want you to understand that clearly before I continue. What I have seen between you and my husband is not an affair. It is something. I am not sure of the precise word for it, but it is not nothing, and I am not a woman who pretends that things which are not nothing are nothing. I find that approach exhausting and dishonest. Amara's hands were very still in front of her, the hands of someone exerting careful control. I would like to ask you something, Ji-yeon said, and I need you to answer me honestly, not diplomatically, not protectively, honestly. Yes, ma'am. Do you care for him? A long pause. The persimmon tree moved slightly in the wind. I would leave, Amara said quietly. If you asked me to leave, I would go today. I would not. That is not what I asked, Ji-yeon said, gently but precisely. I asked if you care for him. Amara closed her eyes briefly, then opened them. Yes, she said. I am sorry. I have tried very hard not to, but yes. Ji-yeon nodded once. She turned back to the orchids and touched one petal, not adjusting it, just touching it, the way you touch something when you need to feel that the world is still solid under your hands. My mother, she said, used to tell me that love is not like money, that it does not divide when you share it, that the giving of it to one person does not reduce what is available for another. She paused. I spent a long time not believing her. I thought it was something mothers said to console children who felt overlooked, but I am beginning to think she may have been right. Amara was very still. I want to be very clear, Ji-yeon said, turning back to face her. What I am considering, and I am only considering, I have not decided, is not a small thing. It would require honesty from all three of us that most people are not capable of. It would require that you understand completely that I am this home's first, not as a matter of pride, as a matter of structure. Without structure, nothing survives. Not families, not organizations, not love. And I have spent my entire adult life building structure out of circumstances that did not come with any. She looked at Amara steadily. What I am considering, she said, slowly, is whether a child could grow up in this house, whether a family, not the conventional shape of one, but the real substance of one, is still possible here, and whether you are the kind of woman who could be part of that without losing either my dignity or yours. The silence that followed was the longest in the garden's history. Amara stood in the winter rooftop garden of the 42nd floor, with Seoul below her, and the Han River catching the pale morning light in the distance, and she looked at this woman, this composed, extraordinary, quietly devastating woman, and she felt something she had no immediate language for. Why are you telling me this? Why not simply ask me to leave and find another solution? Because I watched you, Jian said simply. For months I watched you, and you are decent, Amara. You are genuinely, effortfully decent. In a life like mine, that is rarer than you can imagine. I do not throw away decent people lightly. Amara looked at her for a long time. Then she said, "What would you need from me?" Subscribe right now because the conversation Ji-Yan is about to have with her husband is unlike anything you have heard. And comments below. Do you think Ji-Yan is the strongest woman in this story or the most broken? Or is she both? Tell us what you think. She chose a Tuesday, not for any symbolic reason, but because Tuesday was, in the rhythm of their household, the quietest night. No business commitments, no social obligations, just the two of them, and the view of the river, and the particular quality of silence that 15 years of marriage produces, full of history, dense with everything that has been said and left unsaid, like a room that has been lived in long enough to hold the shape of its people. She waited until after dinner, until the table had been cleared and the household had settled, and the city below had passed into its later, quieter register. Then she poured 2 glasses of the bourbon he kept for moments that required something stronger than wine, and she set one in front of him, and she sat down across from him, and she said, "I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen to all of it before you respond." Min-Jun looked at her. He reached for the bourbon. He said, "All right." She told him everything, the months of watching, the conversation with Amara in the garden, her own thinking, the long and painful thinking, the question she had been living with since the morning she had stood in the hospital corridor and understood that her body had delivered its final answer. She told him about the grief she had carried alone for 5 years, quiet and perfectly managed on the outside, a continuous internal weather she had never asked him to stand in with her. She told him that she understood what he had sacrificed, that she had always known, that his silence on the subject had not fooled her for a single day, because she knew him the way you know someone you have been the closest witness to for 15 years. She told him that she had not arrived at this lightly, that it had cost her something she could not quite name but could feel with complete certainty, a relinquishing, a loosening of a grip she had not known she was holding this tightly, that she had fought with herself about it, had argued herself out of it and back into it and out of it again for months, and that she had arrived finally at this. "I want you to have a child," she said. Her voice was completely steady. She had practiced this steadiness. "I want this household to have a child in it, and I want, if she is willing, and I believe she is, and if you are willing, which I am asking you directly and honestly tonight, I want it to be with Amara, because I have watched her and she is good, and a child deserves to come into a home with a good mother, and I believe I could love that child as my own, because it would be born in this house, and this house is mine, and I do not love things halfway." Min-Jun had not moved through all of this. He was the stillest she had ever seen him, and she had seen him still in boardrooms with men threatening his life. She had seen him still in hospital corridors. She had seen him still in the worst moments of their marriage, the moments that had tested the structure of it and found it, somehow, intact. But this was a different stillness. This was the stillness of someone struck completely through. When she finished, the silence lasted a very long time. Then he said, "Jian." Just her name, like it was the only word available to him. "Do not tell me I do not have to do this," she said. "I know I do not have to. I am choosing to. There is a difference, and the difference is important to me." He stood up. He came around the table. He knelt down in front of her, this man who had not knelt for anything in 20 years, and he took her face in his hands, and he looked at her with an expression that had no name in any language she knew. "You are the most extraordinary person I have ever known," he said, "and I have known some extraordinary people. I know, you should tell me that more often." Something in his face shifted, a crack in the composure, the briefest one before he gathered himself. "Are you sure, Gian? Are you truly sure?" She looked at him, the man she had chosen, the man she had built a life alongside, brick by brick in the particular architecture of a life that most people could not have inhabited, and that she had not only inhabited, but made beautiful. "I am sure that I love you," she said. "I am sure that I want you to have the thing you have never once asked for, because you are that kind of man. I am sure that this home has room for more love than it currently contains, and I am sure that I am not going to let fear make this decision for me. I have never let fear make my decisions. I am not starting now." He pressed his forehead against hers. They stayed like that for a long time, two people at the edge of something irreversible, holding each other in the moment before the step. What followed was not simple. It would be a dishonesty, the kind Gian despised above all others, to describe it as anything other than profoundly, daily, achingly complicated. There were mornings when Gian stood at the coffee machine and watched Amara move through the kitchen with the particular ease of a woman who had found her place in a space, and felt something that was not quite jealousy and not quite grief, and had no single word for it, only a texture, like a cloth pulled slightly wrong across the chest. There were evenings when Minjun came home and the quality of his tiredness was slightly different. Still bone deep, still the tiredness of a man carrying an empire, but with something else underneath it. A warmth, a settled quality. And Gian would recognize that he had spent time with Amara that day, and she would sit with that recognition, without fleeing it, without performing an equanimity she was not fully feeling, until the feeling passed through her and resolved into something she could carry. She had given herself permission to feel all of it. This was the decision she had made and rarely spoken about, even internally, that she would not pretend, that the choosing of this had not dissolved the hardness of it, that she could have made the choice and still, on certain days, find it costly. Both things were true. Both things could be true simultaneously, and the second one did not cancel the first. Amara, for her part, moved through this new configuration with a carefulness that Gian recognized as love. Not romantic love directed at her, but a genuine care for her dignity, a constant low-level attention to what Gian needed, a determination not to crowd her or diminish her or take up space that had not been offered. She consulted Gian on household decisions that were technically within her own domain. She never once behaved as though the terms of this arrangement had given her something she had not been given, as though she had earned status she had not been granted. Gian noticed all of this. It mattered to her enormously. It was the thing that made the arrangement workable day to day, not the grand architecture of the agreement, but the small daily courtesies with which Amara honored it. Minjun, navigating the center of this in his characteristic silence, did the thing Gian had asked of him. He saw her. Every day, he looked at her with the specific quality of attention she had requested, the full seeing of the man who had known her for 15 years and who understood, finally and completely, what it had cost her to be the woman she was in this situation, and who intended that cost to be witnessed. He brought her flowers on a Thursday for no reason. He sat with her in the garden in the early morning and said nothing, just sat, a presence. He told her, more than he ever had before, that she was extraordinary, that he was grateful, that the shape of his life, whatever it had become, was livable because she was in it. She received all of this without deflecting it. This was new. She was learning, at 43, to let herself be seen. It turned out to be one of the harder things she had ever done. Amara's family was quietly brought into the circle of care. Her mother, Namvula's medical needs were addressed through a private clinic arrangement Jian made without being asked, because it was the right thing, and because in Jian's architecture of values, the right thing was simply what you did. Her brother, Latiwe's final year of university, was funded without ceremony. Amara wept in private when she understood what had happened. When she finally mentioned it to Jian 3 days later, Jian said only, "If you are in this house, your people are in this house. That is simply how it works." Amara looked at her for a long moment. Then she said, "My mother would like you." Jian, who was not a woman easily disarmed, was briefly, visibly disarmed. She said, "Tell me about her." And Amara did, and Jian listened, and in the telling and listening, something shifted between them. Not dramatically, not suddenly, but the way the light shifts when a cloud moves. The same landscape, but different, brighter, the details suddenly distinct. The baby came on a Wednesday in October. The birth had been planned carefully, as everything in that household was planned carefully. The hospital, the medical team, the security arrangements, the discretion agreements. Minjun had been present. Jian had been present. This had been her choice, insisted upon, quietly and without room for negotiation. She would be there. Whatever this was, whatever shape it took, she would not absent herself from it. Absence was not her answer to difficulty. It had never been. The baby was a girl. They named her Suyan, the first syllable from Minjun's family naming tradition, the second, Yan, from Jian's own name, offered by Jian herself, quietly as Amara was still recovering, as Minjun stood with the child in his arms, looking at her with an expression Jian had never seen on his face in 15 years of watching his face. She understood immediately and completely that it was the expression of a man encountering something that had reordered his interior of him. She gave the name. She put it there deliberately, in the child who was not hers by blood, but who had come into a house that was hers, into a life that was hers, into the arms of a man whose joy was inseparable from her own joy, because that was what 15 years of shared life produced. And then Minjun turned, with the baby in his arms, and he held the child out to Jian. Not to show her, not to let her see, he held the child out to her in the specific way of someone offering something that belongs to you. Jian had not expected this. She had prepared for many things, for complexity, for ambivalence, for the managed grief of a woman watching someone else receive what she had been denied. She had not prepared for this. She took the baby. Suyan was very small. She smelled of the particular newness that nothing else in the world smells of. She made a sound, not crying, just a small, inquiring sound, and Jian felt her own arms adjust automatically, instinctively, as though they had been practicing this without her knowledge. She looked down at the child, and everything she had been holding, the years of grief, the carefully managed loss, the quiet and absolute devastation of being told that her body would not do this particular thing, the 5 years of carrying it alone, the months of thinking and rethinking and deciding and doubting, all of it moved through her at once, not as devastation, but as something that was both grief and gratitude simultaneously, so intertwined she could not have separated one from the other. She felt Amara's hand on her arm. She looked up. Amara was watching her from the hospital bed. tired, post-labor, soft-eyed, and her expression held something Jian had not expected to find there. Not exactly gratitude, though that was present. Something more deliberate, more chosen. It looked like, I see what this costs you. I see what you gave. I am not going to pretend it was nothing. I am going to hold that knowledge and honor it every day of my life. Jian could not speak for a moment. Then she said, very quietly to the baby in her arms, Hello, Suyan. I am going to love you very well. I have been practicing for a long time. Minjun made a sound she did not look up at because she knew that if she looked at him in this moment, she would lose the composure she was barely maintaining. She was not ready to lose it. Not yet. Not here. She held the baby a little longer. She held her the way you hold something you have waited for so long that the reality of it is almost too large to contain. Carefully, completely, with the whole self. Suyan grew up knowing that her family was not shaped like other families. She knew this the way children know things they have been raised inside, not as a problem requiring solution, but as the simple texture of her particular life. She had Amma, which was what she called Jian from almost the beginning, because that was the word she heard most in relation to the woman who held her and sang to her and taught her the names of orchids and read to her every night with the focused, unhurried attention of someone for whom this child was the most important audience in the world. She had Umama, which was what she called Amara, the Zulu word for mother, which Amara had taught her alongside the Korean words, so that the child grew up moving between languages with the ease of someone for whom borders were not natural features of the world. She understood from very young that she had arrived into a home built by extraordinary acts of will and extraordinary acts of love. And she carried this knowledge not as a burden, but as a kind of inheritance. And she had Appa, Kang Min-jun, the most feared man in Seoul, who became in the privacy of the 42nd floor simply Appa, a man who taught his daughter to play baduk with the same patient thoroughness with which he managed an empire, and who was present for every school performance and every illness and every nightmare, and who was, by every measure that a child uses to assess these things, entirely and thoroughly there. The household settled into its new shape the way all living things settle, not without adjustment, not without difficulty, but with the underlying resilience of something built on a genuine foundation. Amara and Jian did not become the same person. They were not required to. They remained distinct, different in temperament and background and the particular music of their personalities, and they found in those differences, over time, not conflict but complementarity. Jian's precision alongside Amara's warmth, Jian's structure alongside Amara's ease, each of them giving the child something the other could not, and the child receiving all of it and becoming, in the way that children do, more than the sum of what she was given. People asked, sometimes. The question was always oblique. The world Jian inhabited was not one in which directness was common, but the shape of it was always the same. How? How did you do it? How does a woman do what you did? Jian had several answers, depending on who was asking and how much she trusted them. For the ones she trusted least, she said simply, "Love requires decisions. I made one." For the ones she trusted more, she said, "I decided that my grief was not more important than his joy. That is a decision I had to make every day for a long time, until it became something I did not have to decide anymore, until it simply was." And for the very few, the one or two people in her life with whom she permitted complete honesty, she said this, I was afraid that if I held on tightly enough to the shape I wanted my life to take, I would crush the actual life inside it. I had seen that happen to other people. I refused to let it happen to me. So I opened my hands, and what came into them, what grew in them, was more than I had known how to want. Suyan, at 7 years old, asked Jian once why she loved her. The question came on a Tuesday morning, unprompted, in the kitchen, while Jian was making coffee and Suyan was eating rice porridge and swinging her legs under the chair. Jian set down her coffee. She turned around. She looked at this child. Dark eyes, her father's stillness, her birth mother's warmth already visible in the way she moved toward people rather than away from them, and some quality all her own that was neither of these things, but purely herself. Because, Jian said, you were the answer to a question I had been asking for a very long time, and when you arrived, you were better than anything I could have imagined asking for. Suyan thought about this for a moment. What was the question? She asked. Jian picked up her coffee. It was whether love was big enough, she said. It turns out it is. She went to sit beside her daughter. Outside, the Han River caught the morning light the way it always did, constant, indifferent, ancient, and 42 floors below, Seoul went on being Seoul, relentless and brilliant and full of lives in all their irreducible complexity, each of them trying, in their own way, to build something worth the effort of building. In the kitchen of the penthouse, a woman and a child ate breakfast. That was enough. That was, in fact, everything. If Jian's story moved you, if it reached somewhere inside you that you were not expecting, please leave a comment. Tell us what you took from her. And subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. We tell the stories that do not fit into simple shapes, because those are always the ones that stay with you.